A very good afternoon to you, to all of you, my FB Live viewers. First of all, I hope that you all are safe, healthy, and taking very good care of yourself and your families. And of course, my heartfelt thanks to all the Corona warriors out there who are there on the front line and making sure that we stay healthy. Now, today, I'm going to talk about how to influence people. And for those of you who are joining me today for the first time, normally I would speak for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then I'll start taking questions from all of you. And we are going to finish bang at 3:30. So this is just a 30-minute session. Now, before I start talking to you about how to influence people, let's try and understand what does influencing really mean. And for this, we have to look at the root of influence. So, at the root of influence is the process of communication. Communication, etymologically, comes from the Latin root communis, which means to share or to make common. And what is it that you share? You share messages. So, communication is defined as exchange of messages between a sender and a receiver by using a medium. And that medium could be face to face, it could be an online medium, such as I talking to you, it could be a telephone, it could be a written communication, so on and so forth. Now, please note that there are only three objectives to any communication on this planet. All other objectives get subsumed under these three. One is informing, second is convincing, and the third is persuading. Now, informing is easy to understand. I want to give you some information. For example, I wanted to inform you that my show is going to end at 3:30, and that's information given and information taken by you. What is the difference between convincing and persuading? Convincing is a state of mind, whereas persuasion is a state of action. And what is meant by that is when I convince somebody, I make the other person agree to whatever I'm saying. And when I persuade somebody, I make the other person do whatever it is that I want him or her to do. So, for example, let's say I'm trying to convince you to start exercising, and I convince you, and you say, all right, Himanshu, I agree. Exercising is good for health. But you don't start exercising. You agree that exercising is good and it's good for your health, it's good for your life, but you don't start exercising. Then I have managed to convince you, but I have not managed to persuade you. However, if you start exercising, then I have managed to persuade you. And when I say influencing, influencing is a combination of convincing and persuasion. Influencing means that you change the mind of the person as well as you make sure that the person does what you want him or her to do. And mind you, please note that convincing is not a necessary prerequisite to persuasion. I might get persuaded without being convinced just because, say, my guru told me to, or my mother told me to, or my father told me to, or somebody who I admire, he or she told me to, I might do something without being convinced. But influencing is about convincing and persuading. Now that we have this, let's come to the actual theme of the day. How can we influence people? And here we have an entire gamut of things that we can do to influence people. On the one end of the gamut is the reward and punishment system. And on the other end of the gamut is something that I call idealized influence. Let's try and understand all of these in a little bit of a detail. When we say reward and punishment, you can actually influence people by exercising your powers to punish them or by withholding resources that you might have. But as you can see, it may work only for people in a downward direction, which means if you have a superior authority or if you are up there in the hierarchical pyramid, in that case, you can perhaps exercise your power of punishment. But please remember that power of punishment can also be assumed by somebody who's a little weaker. Or you can actually deal with more powerful people as well by actually punishing them. How do you do that? Think of elections. You make a coalition. When a lot of people come together, you can actually overthrow a government. You can actually change a government. You can actually change a representative. And therefore, by creating coalitions, even seemingly weaker people can actually exercise a power of punishment. And the other is, of course, the power of reward. If at all you can reward a person, and particularly if the reward is something that the other person desires, in that case, you can influence a people through that particular reward. But as I said, this is the most simplest and perhaps not the best way of influencing people. Thereafter, we go to something called individual consideration. And what is individual consideration? Look at any psychological model and then see where does that person lie on that psychological model, which means you have to understand the psychology of the individual. Take for account the Maslow's hierarchy. If you find out, and I'm not sure as to how many of you know Maslow's hierarchy, but Maslow's hierarchy is a need based model of motivation. And it says that fundamentally human beings have five categories of needs, and these needs are in a hierarchical order. So at the base are your physiological needs, which is roti, kapra, makan kinds. You need food, you need water, you need a house, etc., etc. Thereafter, you have safety needs, which means you want to feel safe and secure. Above that are the social needs, which means you want to be appreciated by people, you want friends, you want relationships. Beyond that are esteem needs, which means you have a desire to be respected by others as well as in your own eyes. And then finally, you have self actualization needs, which means you want to perform to your true potential. You want to realize your true potential. So, by understanding the psychology of the person, the target, which means that the person that you wish to influence, you can actually influence that person by looking at where does this person lie on this hierarchy of needs. So, if that person is on the basic need level, which means a physiological need level, then you can give to the person whatever the person actually desires. Likewise, if the person is at a social need person, so you can actually provide relationship, you can actually provide some kind of a social commitment, you can actually provide some kind of an emotional support to that person because this person is actually looking for friends. So therefore, by making that person like you can actually influence that person. And you can see that while once again the lower to needs, people who are at lower to needs can possibly be influenced by people who are high up there, but when it comes to social needs and thereupon, you can actually influence people who are more powerful than you, who are more resourceful than you, because you have something that they actually desire, and that is a sense of friendship, a sense of being, somebody being there for them. Likewise, if a person has esteem needs, then you can actually enhance the esteem of that person by giving that person status. Now, this is actually a part of the influence tactics and it's called ingratiation. You can ingratiate yourself to the person. And some people, of course, look at it from a slightly blinkered perspective and say, oh, that's like polishing an apple, buttering, makhan lagana, ityadi, ityadi. But please note that ingratiation is not just that. Ingratiation is when you do something for the person beyond what is the call of the duty, when you actually laugh with the person, when you actually support the person in the times of need, when you help out the person, though it may not be your job at that point of time. So, by doing these things, you ingratiate yourself to the person. And please note that this works very beautifully when it comes to actually influencing people who are higher up on the hierarchical level or who are more powerful than you. And finally, you have the self actualization. If you can help somebody realize his or her potential, in that case, you can actually influence that person towards whatever it is that you want. The third way, which is a slightly better way than even this, is called the Aristotelian rhetoric. You can actually influence people by inspiring them with your words. And this theory was given by Aristotle. I mean, imagine way back 300 BC is what we are talking about. 2,300 years ago, Aristotle gave this theory, and this theory still stands. And he said, if you want to influence somebody, you need to have three elements in your message: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is the credibility. Ethos is the credibility of the influencer in the eyes of the influencees on the subject that he is trying to influence them on. Please note, this is not a generic credibility. It's a very specific credibility on that particular issue that you're trying to influence others on. So, for example, if I'm trying to influence you to start exercising, and I myself don't exercise, I myself don't take care of my own health, in that case, my ethos will be low, no matter how great a person I might be otherwise in life. Pathos means passion, which means that you should be passionate about whatever it is that you are trying to influence the other person about, and you should make that other person emotional on that particular issue. So, which means, once again, taking the example of exercise, if I'm trying to make you exercise, I should sound passionate that, hey, when I do yoga, I really feel blissful. And therefore, you should also start doing it. And I should make you emotional about it. Do you know that yoga is one of those ancient things that India was known for? It's India's own invention, India's own discovery, and it is way more than just a set of exercises. Now, I'm trying to make you emotional about it. And the final element of Aristotelian rhetoric is logos. And logos means logic, which means that you need to also rationally persuade people. Now imagine, this is what Aristotle has to say. Normally we say that if the other person is logical, through logic, if you're rational, you can actually influence people. But Aristotle says no. Logic is necessary, but it is not sufficient. You need a combination of these three, which means beyond the logic, beyond the rational argument, you need to sound passionate, you need to actually make the other person emotional, and you need to have personal credibility on that issue where you are trying to influence the other person. And finally, the ultimate way when influence actually becomes an inspiration is called the idealized influence, which means you make yourself in such a way, you inculcate those things in yourself in such a way that the other person gets influenced simply by looking at you, simply by reading what you write, simply by seeing as to what is it that you want to do with your life. For example, Gandhi was a great influencer because even it was he who said that my life is my message, but he actually made his life in such a way. So when people saw Gandhi actually doing his own work, people understood that this is what they are supposed to do. And without him having to say it, people actually started doing their own work, their own household chores, etc. When Gandhi, they saw that Gandhi, despite being on the violent end of the other person, of the Britishers over there, Gandhi did not budge, and Gandhi never ever became violent himself. In that case, because of the way Gandhi actually made himself, his own ideals, they influence people automatically. So, therefore, please note that you can influence anyone, be it somebody in your peer group, be it somebody who's hierarchically higher than you, or who you, in your perception, think is more powerful than you, and also be it somebody who is lower in hierarchy or who you think is less powerful than you. The only thing is you have to choose wisely from this range of starting from punishment to the idealized influence and use the appropriate method of influence with the appropriate people. So I'm going to stop here and now I'm going to look at the questions. Um, a lot of good afternoons. I'm so glad that all of you are have been waiting for this session. Okay, convincing, persuading, and influencing. Absolutely. How do you differentiate between manipulating and influencing? So the difference, Anuradha, is in the intention. For example, let's pick up the word propaganda. The moment we say propaganda, suddenly we have these negative connotations coming in. Why? It is only post the First World War where propaganda was actually used as a tool to influence minds for the wrong reason. And which is why propaganda itself became a word with negative connotations. Likewise, when we are talking about influencing, If the influencing is being done for the wrong reasons or by using the wrong method, then it becomes manipulation. For example, when we talk about the pathos part, and I'm so glad you asked this question, Radha, when we talk about the pathos part, pathos means that you're trying to make that person emotional about something. Now, how do you make that person emotional? One is you do so emotionally in a positive way, wherein I say, "Oh, come on, you must look after your health. You must exercise. If you are healthy, then people around you will also get to benefit from you. Your family will be happy, so on and so forth." Now, remember, this is not a rational persuasion because I don't need to be healthy for the sake of somebody else. A rational persuasion would be that I should be healthy for my own sake because a healthy mind can reside only in a healthy body. But when I'm using this pathos, emotion, for the right reason, it is fine. But if I use emotion as a tool to blackmail, something called an emotional blackmail, then it becomes manipulation. So if I say that, look, if you don't start exercising from tomorrow, I'm going to stop eating. Or if you don't start exercising from tomorrow, even I'll stop exercising. Now that is emotional blackmail and that is manipulation. So the difference between the two, Anuradha, is in the intent and the method in which you actually execute this particular method. How to deal with the workplace bullies? Prabha, always remember that bullies are essentially cowards. So if you see a bully, remember that that person has an inferiority complex, which the person has now tried to turn into a superiority complex. Because when you feel inferior, you try to take it out on others simply because you think that you are not as good as others. And the one way in which a lot of people psychologically cope with it is trying to appear better than other people. And one of the ways in which you can appear better is by use of brute power because you think that is the easiest to do. But please remember, brute power is used by the less evolved species like the apes, etc. A gorilla would use a brute power, not a human being. How to counter with bullies, therefore, is very interesting since the bully at the core of it is a coward pushback, which means call the bluff. And you will realize that if you push back on a bully, the bully is likely to go in the sense is likely to withdraw. And yet if you find the person bullying you, in that case form what I call an enabling coalition, because a bully is always a bully and you will find many people that this person would have bullied. So if you collect all of those people and find a coalition which speaks in one voice, then you push back as a combined unit and that would lay the bully off. How to lead people who don't respect you? This is very interesting because a lot of time we think that respect is something we can command. But please remember, respect is something that you need to earn. You can perhaps command respect by using your legitimate powers, which means by using the power of your authority. But please remember, the power of your authority is never going to be a sustained use of power. It is never going to be a sustained source of power because the day the authority goes, so will that particular power that was associated with that particular position or designation. And therefore, if you want people to respect you, you must earn their respect. And how do you do so? There are multiple ways of doing it. First of all, you can do it either by becoming an expert. And the moment you become an expert, in another FB Live talk of mine, I spoke about this halo effect. If you become an expert in one thing, people start attributing a lot of other good things onto you and thereby making you likable in the eyes of people. Second, you can develop those attributes inside you which people seem to like. This may not be an expertise, but these may simply be attributes that, for example, people who dress very well. This is not an expertise. You may not be a fashion designer or a fashion expert or some such thing, but simply because you dress very well, people start liking you and they start coming to you for advice. And that ways you start earning their respect slowly. But the key is that you have to earn the respect, and this is a slow process, it's a deliberate process, and it's a process which will require a lot of persistence. How do we convince children to pursue excellence? Now, this is a very interesting one, Vikram. Pursuing children, first of all, remember, children by their nature learn through imitation. So, as infants, we all learn through imitation. We tend to imitate the people who are closest to us, and we tend to imitate those people who make us feel safe. Which is why, as infant, most people imitate their mother and then subsequently their father. And therefore, if you happen to be somebody who's related to that particular child and you're trying to influence a child, then make sure that you're doing so with your own behavior, your deeds, your actions. And please remember, when the child watches your behavior, the child also absorbs. And we all have that capacity as children. But as we grow up, most of us lose that capability, and that is of instinct. An infant instinctively knows whether the expression that the person has is in line with the real thoughts of the person or not. And which is why psychologists say that if you're not in a good mood, you should not go close to an infant, because you might have a smile on your face, which the infant can see, but the infant can also sense that there is something wrong with you. And this creates a lot of confusion in the infant. Now, even when the infant grows up as a child, as I said, you don't lose that instinct, just out of the blue one day. It slowly keeps on deteriorating, and for most people you lose that instinct after a while, but yet that instinct remains. So make sure that whenever you are telling the child to do something, you actually do it, which means you have that ethos or the credibility, and at the same time you should actually mean it, or at least it should appear to the child that you actually mean it, and that will come from your body expression and your body language. So make sure that the two of them are in tandem, your words and your expressions and your body language, and that is good enough. If the superior has formed a negative impression about you, what do you do? How do you influence the superior? This is a very tricky one, Balmukund, because one of the things I have noticed is through my experience that you know a impression once formed is very difficult to obliterate. So it's very easy to form a wrong impression, but it takes a lot of time and effort to create the right impression. My first question to you, therefore, would be, do you really care about how the other person thinks of you, what the other person thinks of you, or that the fact that you have a bad impression? And why I'm saying this is because what other people think about you is actually none of your business, so long as you think you are doing the right thing. However, let's say it matters to you as to what does the other person think about you for, say, official reasons or for hierarchical reasons. It's your boss who has formed a negative impression about you, and therefore now you want to change that particular impression. Now, as I said, the journey is going to be arduous, it's going to be time consuming, it's going to be hard. So the first thing that you need to do is try to use the ethos, pathos, logos in a particular way. And I'm glad that you've given me an opportunity to do so. There is a method to the madness of ethos, pathos, and logos. In which order should you try them so that they are most effective against people or with people? So, if you have a person who has a negative opinion about you, in that case, use pathos in the beginning and then subsequently use logos. And ethos is something that you need to build in all throughout. And what I mean by that is that if somebody has a negative opinion about you and you try to rationally persuade him or her, trying to say that, look, no, I'm not this kind of person, the person is going to shut the door on you. What you need to do is you need to get your foot in the door. You need to get the door a little ajar and then you go in. And that can be done by making emotional appeals to that person, by ingratiating yourself to that person, so that at least the person then gives you time. The person gives you patience and listens to you. Once a person starts listening to you, then give rational arguments about why the person is wrong in whatever impression the person has actually made of you. And throughout, make sure that your credibility is well established. Whatever impression that you're trying to create is actually visible in every action of yours and in every word of yours. And however, if you're trying to actually influence somebody who's already on your side, then use the rational appeal first and then end with a pathos kind of an appeal, which means end with an emotion. So let's say if you're talking about exercising, talk about the good things about exercising, how it will improve your health, how it will enhance your life, how it will give you a healthy life, how with a healthy life you can actually think more healthily and therefore make better and better decisions and perhaps realize the potential. And then at the end of the conversation, say, come on, let's do it and let's keep a tab on it. Let's work on it together. So by using this combination in this particular way, you can actually influence people who are against you or who have formed a wrong or a negative opinion. Can ingratiation lead to corruption? Akshat, this is an interesting question. See, ingratiation and corruption are two completely different things. Corruption, in a very narrow sense of the word, is the use of public resources for private gain. And it manifests itself through three methods: misappropriation of funds, bribery, or nepotism. Whereas when we are talking about ingratiation, we are saying that you make yourself likable to this particular target who you are trying to influence. And to make that other person likable, to make yourself likable in the eyes of the other person, you don't have to really do bribery, or you don't have to misappropriate funds, or you don't have to do any of those three manifestations of corruption. You can actually, as I said, do it by doing things like helping out the person when that help was not asked for, by giving respect to that person when that respect was not demanded. So when you give to somebody something that the person does not expect, and without asking for something in return at that point of time, then the person gets ingratiated towards yourself. Of course, Godfather used it to a completely different extent, where he would thank and bank. He would do something for a person and then say, I'm going to come and collect whenever I want to. But we are not talking about that. We are saying ingratiation by helping out a person or by doing something for the other person when the other person did not ask, by not demanding anything in return at that point of time. But please remember, the moment you do this, the person does feel that there is something that the person owes to you, and therefore when the time comes, that is where you can influence the person who is ingratiated towards you to get what you want done at that point of time. How do you make other people accept that they need to change their perspective? See, you can do it by two, three ways. One is by making sure that you never get personal. Now, this is another thing that I had said, that whenever you think that you are in a conflict with the other person, with somebody else, in the matter of either perception or in the matter of whatever it is that you're trying to influence the other person about, in situation of a conflict, don't try to put the blame on the other person. First of all, the best way to resolve a conflict is to keep the conflict focused on the issue rather than the person. Which means don't talk about the person. Don't say that, look, you are wrong. Say, okay, what you are saying, I look at this particular issue a little differently, and then try to put across your point. Because remember, the moment you point a finger at the other person, it is very unlikely that you will be able to influence the other person. And the second thing to resolve a conflict that you need to do is to acknowledge your own role in that particular conflict, which means also accept that you may have also contributed in the creation of this particular conflict. You may have contributed in creation of this negative image. You may have contributed in terms of not being articulate enough so that the other person understands your viewpoint. So the moment you start looking at it in this collaborative way, where you own part of the blame, you don't blame the individual, but you keep the attention focused on the issue, it is likely that you will be able to change their perspective once again by using the combination of ethos, pathos, and logos, and of course, by ensuring that your behavior and your words are in line with whatever it is that you're trying to say. When does punishment work? Well, punishment works for a whole lot of time, but the point is not whether it works or not. The point is, should it be used? And these are two very, very different things. So I would say punishment works a lot, but it is not the best way to actually deal with intelligent human beings when there are better ways available. So I would say use punishment only as the last resort if you have exhausted all other options. So thank you very much. It's 3:30, and as usual, I see that there are so many questions that are unanswered. And as I have promised you, what I can try and do is I will take these questions in another session. So if at all I believe that a particular session needs more than one Saturday, then I will take it up in the next Saturday. And I've also promised you that now I will alternate between Saturdays in English and Hindi. So the next Saturday 3 p.m. session is going to be in Hindi. And I will tell you the topic of my talk well in advance. Thank you very much for being here. Once again, please stay home. And even if you're going out of home to take care of your work or to take care of your family, make sure that you're following the norms of physical distancing and you take care of those people who are not as privileged as you are. Thank you very much and see you next Saturday.